Well, good morning, delegates. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we gather and pay my respects to elders past and present. It's an honour to stand here as the new leader of the opposition in Brisbane City Council and to stand here on behalf of my 7 council colleagues. I want to acknowledge the deputy that's here today, Councillor Helen Abrahams, and I want to acknowledge and pay tribute to 3 former councillors, David Hinchliffe, John Campbell and Gail McPherson, who retired at the last election. And between them dedicated 65 years of service to the people of Brisbane and also the Australian Labor Party. The last election was tough for the ALP in Brisbane. It was a hard campaign, it was a long campaign, and it was a wet campaign as well on election day. But we were led, as we heard from last night, Ray Smith, an outstanding candidate, someone who devoted 2 years of their life to the people of Brisbane and also the Australian Labor Party. And today I publicly thank Ray for his efforts in leading us at the last election. The former leader, Shane Sutton, is also a delegate to this conference, and Shane, more than anyone in the ALP, began the campaign and led the campaign against Campbell Newman over 4 long years. And today I also acknowledge her service to the Brisbane City Council and also to the ALP. The last election also saw a glimmer of hope for the ALP as well, where we saw 3 great swings in my own local area to Helen Abrahams and to Steve Griffiths. An outstanding result considering the climate in which the ALP fought that election. And in places like Deagon, Northgate, Wynnum Manly, we all saw our sitting councillors returned. The election also saw Graham Quirk elected for the first time in his own right. Now I say, and I often say this, that Graham Quirk is really the 19th Minister in the Newman government as the Minister for Brisbane. Because bad habits are hard to break, and in council each week we see Graham Quirk in the role he was born to play, as Campbell Newman's very, very loyal deputy. And since Campbell Newman became Premier, Graham Quirk's gone quiet. He's let Campbell Newman off the hook on a whole range of things, including, just to name a few, the responsibility for South Bank and Roma Street parklands over to council, with a price tag of $200 million to the ratepayers of Brisbane. And we've seen in the recent budget, in the recent state budget this week, that Graham Quirk didn't advocate for Brisbane City Council. And for local governments, not just in Brisbane, but also across Queensland, we saw a budget that just delivered only cuts to local government. And it just hasn't been cuts to services and staff. It's also been an attack on our local communities. Because in part of Brisbane, in South Brisbane, we had 3 elections this year. And the state election, the South Brisbane by-election, where we saw Jackie Trout elected to the state parliament, and of course the council election, no one in the ALP even mentioned increased building heights in West End. Now this is a plan that was rejected by the community last year, and over 4,000 people objected to increased building heights in West End to 12 storeys. But with the stroke of a pen and a phone call to Jeff Seeney, a deal was done with the LNP in George Street to ignore the views of the local community and increasing heights up to 12 storeys. Now I say that community has been double-crossed, and it's just the start. This council is known for making bad planning decisions, and we already know that we're 2 years late in delivering a new city plan. But the recent council budget also delivered $500 million of new debt to the people of City. And Campbell Newman has a cheek when he starts talking about debt in Queensland. The LNP predictably always like to blame someone else for their failings. But the facts are they've had 9 budgets that they've delivered in City Hall. They've set the policy settings, they've borrowed the money, they've increased rates by almost 3 times the current rate of inflation, and they've increased fees and charges across the board. This council has a serious debt problem that the Lord Mayor is simply ignoring. Council's $2.1 billion $2.1 billion amount of debt is too high when you consider our revenue base. Cost of servicing the debt is blowing up by 30% this year, from $90 million to $117 million. So ratepayers will be paying around $2.65 million each week in debt servicing costs. That's $2.65 million that we can't spend on roads, on intersection upgrades, parks and our libraries and the community facilities. And we should remember, just 4 years ago, this council was completely debt-free. And since then, Campbell Newman and Graham Quirk have embarked on a toll tunnel debt binge. And who can forget things like City Cycle? A $10 million waste of money that has littered our city, full of yellow bikes that are gathering dust and rust. But it's just not the state LNP pursuing an agenda of cutbacks. I mean, you could say that cutting important community programs, services and jobs are in their DNA. And cutbacks have infected the council too. Cost of living pressures are hitting families hard, and the council should be doing all we can to reduce these pressures on families, not cutting basic services and programs. In council, we've seen real examples of the LNP ripping services from our community. Earlier this year, the LNP closed the Inala, the Mount Gravatt and Wynnum Council customer service centres. And these centres were more than just a place to pay rates and pay your dog regos. Staff working in these customer service centres answered local businesses' questions, gave out information on planning matters and provided great advice on all of council services. And these important service closures are hitting locals hard in places like Wynnum, where Campbell Newman has already ripped out the local housing office. These closures mean that people who are some of the most vulnerable and struggling with the cost of living pressures have to travel further, usually on one or more buses, just to do business with the council. But this isn't the only cutback. In a move that can only be called un-Australian, this council's even cut funding to Australia Day events. Under Graham Quirk, we've seen a complete disregard for council employees and the work they do. Graham Quirk is so committed to a slash and burn agenda that this year he sacked more people than he meant to, including IT staff that were told they lost their jobs to help meet a $40 million efficiency target, and they should be grateful for it. Which begs the question, a day after Graham Quirk sacked these workers, we then spent $1 million hiring a chief tweeter for the Brisbane City Council. In this year alone, the LNP at the council has sacked over 500 full-time employees. They've even cut 51 apprentices and trainees. And surely these are the jobs that the Lord Mayor of a city should be trying to protect. These job losses are hurting frontline services, and they are hurting council's ability to deliver programs out in our suburbs, in just the same way that the state cuts are hurting every Queenslander. But don't take it from me. Let's hear a presentation from real Queenslanders.